The philosopher John Rawls is believed to be one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. Now, there are some people who would say he was the most influential. He was certainly not the greatest philosopher of the century. I think you'd have to say that that was Martin Heidegger, the German thinker who was, at least for a time, infatuated by the Nazis, but nevertheless whose philosophical reputation is in the league of the great 19th century philosophers like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and then the 18th century philosophers like Kant and others. Now, Rawls, however, was a political philosopher, and he's most famous for his book called A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. Now, I'm telling you all this because Rawls's name was recently invoked by a law professor in the context of the Supreme Court decision. This is the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade. And here's Aurelia Bardon writing, quote, Rawls wrote that the Supreme Court was the, quote, exemplar of public reason, end quote. How sad it is to see how wrong he was. So according to Bardon, the Rawls, who always believed that morality is not merely a function of instinct, but is a function of reason. We can reason our way to a sound conclusion. And when Rawls was trying to think about who does this, you'd be hard-pressed to say Congress does this. You'd be hard-pressed to say that we're getting this kind of public reason out of the executive branch. I mean, think of Biden and the public unreason that comes out of that guy's mouth. But Rawls goes, what about the Supreme Court? You've got these highly trained forensic scholars, and they're able to not only argue things out, but they have a process of public argument in which when they take a vote, someone writes a decision, then there are critiques of that decision, then the original writer gets to go back and revise that decision based upon those critiques, maybe even changing his or her mind in the process. So this is Rawls. And apparently what's going on here is you've got a left-leaning scholar who doesn't like the outcome of the Supreme Court decision, actually in no way has a critique of Alito's ruling. Alito's ruling is eloquently argued, and in fact, as far as I can see, no one has been able to even nick it, hasn't been able to take a single blow, successful blow at that opinion, not even at part of it. So it gives you a sense of how powerful Alito's opinion is. In fact, it is, an expression of public reason. And it's forced the left to make all kinds of tangential arguments like, well, is gay marriage next, Dinesh? And, well, what about ectopic pregnancies? The decision itself and the other concurrences, by the way, make it really clear that this is all an attempt to divert attention away from the issue at hand, which is essentially the issue of abortion on demand and is moreover the issue of who decides. Now, Rawls is the most famous for using an image, a kind of analogy, that is at the core of his political philosophy, as outlined in A Theory of Justice, his most famous book. By the way, Rawls went on to write books about liberalism and other works, which are also influential, but nothing as influential as A Theory of Justice. And in A Theory of Justice, Rawls was arguing for kind of a quasi-socialist argument. It wasn't pure socialism. It wasn't distributing assets equally to everybody. But basically what Rawls is saying is that we want to have a society where no rule is going to be adopted that doesn't give the greatest advantage to the least advantaged. So in other words, according to Rawls, there are people in society who have more advantages and there are people who have less. And the whole point of society is to bring up the people who are at the bottom end of the scale. Now you might say, well, why? Why would I, if I'm at the top, care about somebody who's at the bottom? Why would I care if I'm in the middle about somebody who's at the bottom? Why would we want to, what makes us establish a rule that might benefit somebody else at our expense? And Rawls offers an answer. And his answer is called the veil of ignorance. He says, look, if we're trying to design a truly just society, what if we all step back and pretend that we don't know what our allotment is going to be in society, our allotment of brains, our allotment of hard work, our allotment of having a good family, our allotment of being raised in favorable circumstances? What if we don't know? We are operating behind this veil of ignorance. How would we design a society? Wouldn't we say that since there is a chance, and maybe a pretty good chance, that we'll end up at the bottom of the heap, that we would want to design a society where the people at the bottom are constantly being helped? It doesn't mean that people at the top have to be necessarily pulled down, but we want to have a system that creates policies to benefit the people who are at the bottom. And this is the veil of ignorance. My idea is, what about if you apply the veil of ignorance to abortion itself? What about if we step back and say, listen, now all of us who are discussing abortion have obviously already been born, but let's say we aren't born. We are about to be born, and we have the choice of living in a society where we have a likelihood or a virtual certainty, absent some sort of medical complications, of us being able to have a chance at life. Or our fate is completely at the whim and disposal of the person who gave us birth, who has a chance to go thumbs up or thumbs down, and if she goes thumbs down, we're killed. Which of us would vote for that kind of society if we were behind the veil of ignorance? In other words, once you're born, you're like, okay, well, I already made it, so I don't mind kicking the ladder down from under me because I've already climbed the ladder myself. So your selfishness drives you in one direction, but the whole point of Rawls is to get away from that kind of selfishness and try to establish a truly just outcome. And his way for doing that is to put us all behind the veil of ignorance. And my point is applying not just the generic concept of public reason, but the veil of ignorance, Rawls' own sort of mechanism. We discover a strong affirmation of the right to life.